We're expecting a relatively full house this evening, and so if anybody would mind moving a little towards the center so some of our guests that are still showing up have room, that would be appreciated. So good evening and welcome everyone to our first Wednesday lecture series. I'm Brett Long, Vice President of Animal Care at the Aquarium of the Pacific. Thanks to all of you for joining us in person, and a thank you to those that are viewing online. We'd like to thank our sponsors for helping make this program possible: Stephen and Brendan Olson, the Osborne and Rourke Charitable Trust, Courtyard by Marriott Long Beach Hotel, and an additional thank you this evening to Adina for organizing tonight's event, although she cannot attend. I would like to introduce you to our invited speaker this evening, Dr. Merlin Tuttle, who will be presenting on the secret lives of bats. After his talk, there will be an opportunity for a question and answer session. Dr. Tuttle is an internationally recognized leader in research, conservation, and photography of bats, and is widely known as the father of modern bat conservation. His photography has been featured in many articles in National Geographic and in countless other publications, providing a firm foundation for conservation efforts worldwide. Since 2014, he's lectured at leading institutions of science around the globe, and his global experience spans more than 60 years. He founded and led Bat Conservation International for nearly 30 years, retiring in 2009. And then Dr. Tuttle started bat conservation in 2014 due to unprecedented new threats to bats that required his unique expertise. His most recent books, The Secret Life of Bats, My Adventures with the World's Most Misunderstood Mammal, The Bat House Guide, and the Smithsonian's book titled Bats, An Illustrated Guide to All Species, have all received top reviews. He also serves as a research fellow in the Department of Integrated Biology at the University of Texas, Austin, and takes more than 1,000 new photos annually. If everybody could please make sure that their phones are silent, I'd like to welcome Dr. Tuttle up to the podium.
Thank you. I'm very much looking forward to introducing you tonight to some of the world's most fascinating, sophisticated, important, and yet frequently misunderstood, intensely feared, and persecuted animals. As you're about to see, the truth is far different than traditional perception. Bats are full of incredible surprises, from the beautiful painted bats of Southeast Asia to yellow-winged bats of equatorial Africa to snow-white ghost bats from Latin America. And right here in California, you have the spectacular spotted bat. A lot of people think bats are ugly, but the truth is that hundreds of species of bats are just as cute as any panda. Now, if you like dinosaurs, there are some that are as strange as any dinosaur, and we do have a few really funny fellows. Bats are incredibly intelligent. They have social systems similar to our own. They have friends, long-term relationships. They share information. They help each other in need. They even adopt orphans. I have trained bats to do all kinds of things. They learn very quickly. The last bat I trained was just a matter of a few weeks ago, and it took me only 10 minutes to train it to come to my hand on call. Sometimes bats have actually attempted to train me. In fact, several years ago in Borneo, a little bat that weighed no more than a U.S. nickel was caught out in the jungle in a mist net. I hand-fed it mealworms that night, and then the next morning I came back with my wife, and the bat completely ignored her and started coming up and bumping me in the nose. It wanted to be fed, and it was pretty obvious. I finally held up a mealworm in my hand and the bat immediately came and got the mealworm out of my hand. I was flabbergasted. This bat had never seen a human before the night before, had probably never caught anything from anybody's hand, and here it remembered all this and could differentiate me from my wife all in one evening's association. Bats come in a big range of size, from giant flying foxes with nearly 6-foot wingspans to tiny bumblebee bats that weigh no more than a U.S. penny. They live in all kinds of interesting places. These Honduran white bats cut large leaves, the midribs, to form a tent to shelter them from the sun and rain. If you're ever in a Latin American rainforest and you see a termite nest with a perfectly round hole drilled in the bottom of it, you might take a look and see what's inside. You'll probably see a couple round-eared bats. These bats have teeth that are especially hardened so that they can chew their way into these termite nests that are so hard that you can chip a machete trying to cut into one. There are the bats inside. Little bamboo bats have specially flattened skulls that enable them to squeeze into tiny beetle holes in bamboo in a split second or come out equally rapidly. Now you might wonder how I get some of these pictures. I get them in many ways. Sometimes I train bats. Sometimes I just have to hope I'm lucky. Here's one where I hoped I was lucky. We looked with an endoscope into a hole in bamboo and knew that there was 2 bamboo bats in this hole. It took me 6 hours. I was training people in Hong Kong how to photograph bats. It took 6 hours to set up with 2 cameras and 5 flashes and an infrared beam to get the picture you just saw. Now you might ask, why in the world would a scientist spend his life running around the world documenting all the bats and what they need and what they provide? Well, it's because bats are incredibly important. The bats coming out of this cave, Bracken Cave, which I personally spent 20 years leading efforts to gain protection of, the bats coming out of this one cave consume 100 tons of insects, mostly crop pests, in a single night. The Texas Department of Parks and Wildlife conservatively estimates that this one group of bats, I'm sorry, I misspoke, that bats in Texas save farmers $1.4 billion annually in avoided crop losses. A lot of people ask, if I put up a bat house, do you think the bats will help by eating mosquitoes? Well, that was a hotly debated subject for a long time, but now with modern barcoding genetic analyses, we can tell exactly down to species what bats are eating. And one of the first studies of big brown bats, and this is a species that's found widely here in California. In fact, this picture was taken here in California. It was found in that first study of them that they were eating 15 species of mosquitoes, including 9 that were transmitters of West Nile virus, and a third of their diet was mosquitoes. In the Mediterranean, researchers put up small bat houses strategically located around rice crops, and within a few years attracted enough bats so that they were able to discontinue use of pesticide spraying. The authors of the paper reporting this stressed a key fact. These bats could not have helped the farmer in pesticide use if there hadn't been a national park nearby where the bats could go and find food in the off season when there weren't moths coming out of the rice fields. So next time you hear about the importance of biodiversity, remember that there's practically nothing we can do to help save wildlife without saving biodiversity. It's the foundation of success. These bats are part of an experiment going on right now in Texas. Troy Swift is president of the Pecan Growers Association of Texas, and he wanted to see if bats could help his pecan orchards. This is his first try. His first bat house attracted 275 bats. He's especially interested in whether they will reduce case bearer moths, but we know that if each one of these bats were to eat just one female moth a night, it could have tremendous impact, because a female moth can carry 50 to 150 eggs, and so by eating that moth before she lays her eggs, he's having tremendous impact in reducing numbers. And if those eggs were to be laid and hatched, each caterpillar would destroy anywhere from 2 to 5 pecan nuts. So you figure it doesn't take very many bats to eat very many of those moths to make a very big difference. And this is something that pecan growers are becoming quite excited about in Texas. I'm also concerned about bats in places as strange as deserts. They're key to healthy survival of everything from deserts to rainforests. In this photo, you see a lot of columnar cacti. These cacti and agave plants, all the way from southern U.S. to northern Chile, are extremely dependent upon bats for pollination and often for seed dispersal as well. These bats are pollinating the agave, from which billions of dollars of tequila and mezcal are produced. This one is about to pollinate a saguaro cactus, and this one's obviously doing a great job of pollinating a giant cardone. The cardone cactus is the world's largest. It's literally grows up to 50 feet tall, and these cacti are critical to the survival of many animals in the desert, all of which could be lost if the cactus declined because there weren't bats to pollinate and disperse the seeds. Now, going to a tropical rainforest, you find some very interesting specialized relationships between bats and plants. This bat is about to pollinate a mucuna flower in Costa Rica. Some of these plants are very careful to get pollinated only by bats. Why? Because bats are by far the most efficient pollinators. Here, this bat is approaching. This first petal that's raised is like a flag telling the bat that the flower is ready to be pollinated, but also it's shaped like a reflective dish, and it reflects the bat's echolocation. He's sending out echolocation from his nose, and you see this nose leaf is aimed right at the middle of the reflector. He is guided by the reflector to find a tiny 2 millimeter long slot, like a keyhole, where he puts his tongue to get a drink of nectar, and just as soon as his tongue goes in, the plant fires pollen onto the bat's rump. Many plants that rely on bats are of critical importance to humans. For example, this short-nosed fruit bat is pollinating banana in Thailand. If we go around the world to East African savannas, we find that one of the world's most famous trees, the baobab, which has often been referred to as the African tree of life because it supports so many animals that depend on it for food or shelter, it too is bat dependent for pollination. The flowers open only at night. The reproductive organs hang down where any bird or bush baby or other critter that wants to get nectar is going to climb down from above and thereby miss the reproductive organs. But a bat can't land to get a drink without doing an almost perfect job of coating itself with pollen from the anthers of the flower. In another area, Ivory Coast, a friend of mine named Don Thomas years ago did a study of little fruit bats like this and their impact on reforestation. He found that these bats were accounting for up to 95% of the first seeds dropped in open clearings in the forest. We talk a lot these days about not only climate change, but how we can mitigate the climate change. And let me point out that bats are by far the most effective, least expensive way to take care of the problem of reforestation. This little Corolla bat is found widely in Latin America. Just one of these bats can disperse up to 60,000 seeds in a single night to new locations. Imagine the impact of a colony of hundreds of these bats. And here is an example of what they can do. This rainforest clearing in Costa Rica has started to regrow. It is now supporting more than 90% of the woody plants in the clearing are ones that come from bat dispersal. These bats eat twice their weight in fruit in a night, and to lighten the load as they go to the next feeding place, they defecate in flight. And they flower these clearings and have huge impact in reforestation. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of what I've learned about getting people to do the right things for the environment, especially traditionally unpopular things like saving bats. This is Norma Monfort. Let's see, she's right here. Her family protected a bat cave on their property for generations. They're very proud of these bats. And then all of a sudden one day they got word from the Philippine government that they were going to destroy the area to expand agriculture. She desperately contacted all the major conservation groups she knew of. Not a single one of them even responded to her. I'm sure they all thought that it was going to be just too difficult a challenge to go against the Philippine government when they just wanted to feed more people. When she contacted me, asked her to send me a picture of the bats. When she did, I realized that her bats were ones that pollinate flowers. I went to the Philippines and shared this picture. You see this bat is covered with pollen. He's pollinating a durian flower. Durian is the king of fruits in the Philippines, sells for billions of dollars annually in Southeast Asia. It was a no-brainer after showing this picture to the local mayor and citizens that we weren't going to see that cave destroyed. In fact, here's the mayor with the baseball cap on. we're signing a successful petition to the Philippine government to have those bats saved is critically important. Today, there is a nature center at that site. Thank you very much. And not only the nature center is there, but I'm very proud of the fact that my lifelong efforts photographing bats are what make a lot of these kinds of places work. They can obtain my pictures typically in places like that at no cost, and they have a huge impact. Speaking of impact, a colleague of mine, Dr. Peter Taylor in South Africa, several years ago contacted me. He was having a hard time getting people interested in bat conservation in South Africa, but he had found that many of the bat species there feed often on green stink bugs. The green stink bug is the most costly pest of macadamia nut orchards. So he asked if I could come and try to photograph these bats eating green stink bugs. It's one thing to tell somebody that something happens, it's quite another to show them that something happens. So I got this picture and we showed it to an annual meeting of macadamia growers, the Macadamia Grower Association of South Africa, and they immediately funded two, not just one, but two PhD level research projects to investigate how to attract more bats to macadamia grower areas. Some situations are more difficult, of course, than others. I generally have found that most people, most of the time, will do the right thing if we're good enough at showing them how the right thing will benefit people. And I believe that most good conservation does benefit people. So we found one of America's largest remaining bat populations deep in the old Millie Hill mine in Upper Michigan. We called the mining company officials, state or city officials. None of them would return a call. They undoubtedly thought that we were just some hippie kooks, and who in the world in his right mind would want to save bats in an old mine? So they didn't even acknowledge our phone calls. It was very tempting to get angry and say, well, these SOBs, we're going to teach them a lesson. And we could have gone to the news media and embarrassed the heck out of them, probably got them to do the right thing at that one place. We could have speculated that there were endangered Indiana bats mixed in with those bats and halted everything under the Endangered Species Act. But instead, I take pride in how many times I am able to avoid conflict and get lasting progress without it. I find that, when I started my conservation efforts, nearly everybody hated bats. People would much rather paid to kill a bat than save a bat. So how in the world was I going to succeed? Well, I found out early on that by arguing with people that they shouldn't hate bats, they shouldn't do bad things toward bats, that didn't do any good. But if instead of trying to win battles with people, you won friends, until you have enough people on your side, you can't win anything, not even a battle. But if you win enough friends, you don't need a battle. And so that's been the bottom line thesis of my success over many years, is avoiding battles by winning enough friends. And so what I did was I offered to give a bat program at the local school where the mine officials' children went. The kids obviously loved my bats. I baited them something awful about how many really cool bats I would show them if they would get their parents to bring them to the county library 2 nights later. To my astonishment, and I think everybody else's, 200 people and their children showed up at the library to hear me speak about bats. I didn't admonish them about not returning phone calls. I didn't tell them that they should protect the bats in the mine. All I did was told them about the importance of bats and what bats did for people. When I ended my talk, people jumped up. So many offered so much that it was just incredible. They offered expertise, manpower, materials, and months later at the dedication ceremony, here we're dedicating a site that's a 200-foot shaft with a cage over the top that now protects both bats and people. And the head of the PR department for Cleveland Cliffs Mining Company came forward and pointed out that the company had saved 90% of its anticipated closure costs by collaborating with bat conservationists. And not only that, they'd gotten the best PR in their history, because when this was accomplished, I didn't say, well, we beat these SOBs and they finally did the right thing. I talked about how farsighted and these people were and how the rest of the country ought to follow their example. And they were so pleased that they offered to host a national conference for mining people on how they could benefit by partnering with bat conservationists. Here they are at the meeting. One of the projects that came out of that meeting is right here in California, McLaughlin Mine in Northern California, where they had a problem with large numbers of worn out tires that they weren't allowed to incinerate or landfill, didn't know what to do with them. And so it was suggested that they could put those end to end, leading to a concrete bunker in the center, and this would serve as a artificial bat cave when they moved the mountain of earth. And this is just one of the kinds of great things that can happen when we acknowledge reality. We, like so many of us who care about the environment, we're tempted too often to look at miners, oil companies, loggers, and think of them as villains bent to destroy nature. We forget that they are our employees. They work for us. It's the amount of consumption and the numbers of us that are making the difference. And if we just acknowledge that we're equally part of the problem, it's not all them bad guys and us good guys, it's amazing the progress we can make. It's hard to even comprehend how much more progress we could make in saving the environment and wildlife if we'd just more often find ways to make friends, join forces with the supposed despoilers of the environment, admit that we're all part of the problem, and work together. If we could spend 10% of what we now spend on litigation about the environment, just imagine how much we could accomplish in saving wildlife and the environment in a long-term lasting way. The way we do it so much now is we win a battle, and we win it as Democrats or Republicans or whatever group, but then in the next election, the other party wins and we lose what we gained before. But when we're all working together to the same goals, we don't have these kinds of problems. This picture illustrates the popularity of saving bats in the mining industry today. Now, it would be irresponsible of me to claim that we made a big difference saving bats in mines without some serious examples. This is the magazine mine owned by the Uniman Company in Illinois. They called us and said they just finished mining in this silica mine, and they had heard about other mining companies getting good PR and getting help. They offered the mine to us. I personally helped raise a very substantial amount of money to stabilize and protect the mine. Today, it has one of the largest, fastest growing populations of endangered Indiana bats in America. Now, back to this idea that maybe I should be helping people instead of bats because people have so many needs. 43 years ago, Buddhist monks that owned Khao Chang Kron Cave in Thailand approached me. They were concerned because they made a good share of their income to support the monastery by selling bat guano fertilizer, but the production was falling precipitously. I investigated and found that poachers were killing huge numbers of bats, selling them to restaurants for people to eat. I suggested that the monks hire a game warden. They did, and this film was taken just a few months ago. There are now millions of bats that have reestablished there. This is a single day's take of guano harvest. The guano is now selling for not $12,000 a year, but $200,000 a year. And the spectacular bat emergences are attracting thousands of tourists. The locals are doing brisk business selling to the tourists. The bats are also estimated to be saving local rice growers $300,000 a year. And for me, the proudest part of this is the fact that when I go back now, I get welcomed like a war hero at the school, where much of the new school is funded by bat dollars, and the children now who excel in school are able to get bat dollar scholarships to go to college. And so the bats are extremely popular. The principals, students, and teachers all wear bat t-shirts one day a week to acknowledge how much the bats are helping the school. Now, you'd think that with all this good news about bats and what they do for us, that we would be hearing the good news in the news media. Problem is I think most of us know, good news doesn't sell too well. It's scary, horrible stuff that instills fear, that sells best. So what do we got? Time magazine. Bats are the #1 carriers of disease. National Public Radio. Bats are arguably among the most dangerous animals in the world. Reuters. Bats carry killer viruses. Now, I know a number of you here tonight are members of Merlin Tuttle's Bat Conservation, and you've supported our work for the last 14 years of a special focus on bats as dangerous. We have been speaking out consistently that this was not the case and there was no evidence to support it. Well, finally, the good news is that more and more news media and scientists are paying attention to what we've been saying. And in fact, just this last spring, the Wall Street Journal published an opinion piece, Why Scientists Love Chasing Bats. Well, they're really speaking about virologists who have been scaring us into spending billions of dollars looking for viruses in bats. The threat to humans from animal viruses is small. The financial incentive to pretend otherwise is large. That's the Wall Street Journal. Now, if indeed bats were anywhere near as dangerous as they're often purported to be, you'd think that the people at Cauchon Cave wouldn't have even survived this long. They'd all been dead long ago. The kids actually play in the guano while their parents are gathering it. Bat researchers have, like me, I've worked for 65 years with bats, often surrounded by millions. We're all still healthy. Millions of people eat bats in the old world, and they're still healthy. Where's the data? It's all speculation that bats are dangerous animals. In fact, this hasn't, we've improved some, and we certainly countered a lot of it, but these are the headlines that almost caused the extinction of the first bat that I studied, the endangered gray bat. Rabies was in every news media headline around in the late 70s and early 80s. I actually encountered cave owners who had been told by the health department that their bats were rabid and dangerous, and they had poured kerosene in their caves and lit it on fire, killing tens of thousands of bats at a time. Even cave explorers were often misinformed and going out of their way to kill bats. But instead of jumping on everybody about doing the wrong thing, I worked with cavers and cave owners to present my findings and get them to think about reality. And soon, the cave owners and cavers became leaders in bat conservation. And here, cavers have driven in from 5 states to help build a 100-ton gate to protect a key site for bats. They're very proud to have made it absolutely caver-proof. Today, in multiple states, you can rent a canoe or a kayak and go bat watching. These people are watching hundreds of thousands of gray bats that were supposed to go extinct that now have recovered so well that we have millions instead of extinction. And that's all happened because of friendly approaches to bat conservation. In the early 80s, just as I was getting full-time involved in bat conservation, was appalled to see headline stories running from coast to coast in the United States claiming bats to be dangerous when hundreds of thousands started moving into a bridge in the center of Austin, Texas. This poster depicts pretty much the reaction. People were warned that the bats were most, if not all of them, rabid and would attack them. And so they started signing petitions to have the bats eradicated. I went down to see what was going on, and seeing exactly the same situation, I predicted that this was a gold mine that could be extremely important to the city. Turned out that I was right. The bats have become incredibly important, popular. Millions of people from all over the world come to Austin to enjoy the bats. Austin has never been so famous. And these people, as you can see here, are in very close contact with the bats. They're within just feet of the bats, 1.5 million bats. and not one single person has been attacked, not one single person has contracted disease from a bat. But in the last 20 years alone, the bats have attracted $200 million tourist dollars to downtown Austin. My next goal is to take this story around the world by sharing it with the millions of people that come from other countries to enjoy our bats. We're working right now to raise the funds to establish a bat entertainment center. It's really a bat education center, but one thing I found is that entertainment is what sells. And if you want to really promote conservation, you got to make it interesting. So we're going to provide the most exciting introduction to bats that can be found anywhere. And all I can say is progress, like I've just explained, does not happen by just one or a few people working alone. It requires the help of many. And so I ask each of you tonight to join me, join Merlin Tuttle's Bat Conservation in making every possible effort to save these long misunderstood but vitally important, delightfully likable masters of our night skies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tuttle. That was wonderful. We certainly have some time for some questions from the audience, and so we have a couple staff members with microphones. And please wait for the microphone and speak clearly, if you would.
Hi. Dr. Tuttle, did you know any of the old guard at Huntsville Grotto, like Bill Varnado? Huntsville Grotto? The caving club in Huntsville?
I don't know that we can understand the name that you're asking for.
Is it the Huntsville Grotto you're asking about?
Yeah.
Yes, the Huntsville Grotto did a wonderful job of, they played a key role in the recovery of the endangered gray bat. They were big time helpful to me in my efforts, and unfortunately in recent years they've too often not been cooperated with as much as they should have been by the federal government. I was just down there a matter of a year ago meeting with federal officials, helping straighten out things so that they could cooperate better in the future. It's just too easy to treat cavers or others that do things that we don't necessarily always approve of, treat them in a bad way, and then we become enemies and fight when we should be friends. But the Huntsville Grotto is a great example of a group of cavers who really, really made it possible to recover the endangered gray bat.
I helped put a sign in the morgue entrance, Fern Cave, back around 1974.
Can you hear him?
Yeah, he said that he helped put a... no, it just doesn't broadcast as far over here. And so he said that he helped...
How about like, oh.
That's better.
I helped install a sign in the morgue entrance, Fern Cave, to tell cavers to keep out during hibernating season. I think that was October through March or something. That was around 1974. And I don't know if you've been to the morgue entrance of Fern Cave, but that's pretty spectacular.
I've been to the morgue entrance of Fern Cave many times. I was the one that convinced the federal government to acquire and protect the site. And it couldn't have been done without a lot of cavers helping. My first trip into the morgue, the cavers reported something that they didn't understand how important it was. But from the evidence they submitted to the Fish and Wildlife Service, I immediately wanted to go in. They said they couldn't take me because I didn't have vertical rope train experience. It was a 105-foot free fall into the cave. I said I'd sign my life away if they would take me the next weekend. And they took me and were flabbergasted when, despite the fact that it was summer and there were no bats there, I said, you know, I believe you guys may have found the most important bat hibernating site in the world, and it proved true.
Can you talk about white nose syndrome?
You're asking about white nose syndrome? That has not seriously affected gray bats, maybe in part because gray bats have been lucky and haven't lost a lot of their key roosting habitat in caves. What we need now to stop white nose syndrome isn't to try to find a cure. What we need is to restore the hibernation sites that they once had, like where we've lost the most bats are in the Northeast. These bats used to hibernate in Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, and millions hibernate in that one cave. But now we've taken it over for humans, and the bats don't have that habitat, so they're hibernating at places where they're having to burn far too much fat at a higher rate during the winter, and in so doing they can't last till spring. They run out of energy and starve to death. But we've been speaking out from the beginning that it's really important to restore habitat, forget about spending millions of dollars on finding a cure that isn't going to work.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I thought it was kind of interesting with your educational and tourism bent that it's kind of copying what a lot of people in the whaling industry are finding out, that there's more money in whale tourism than there was in actually capturing the whales. So it's a very interesting approach to conservation.
I was very pleased last summer. We're right now making a film about the recovery of the gray bat to hopefully influence future generations into the best ways to do these things. And cave after cave that we went to that had no bats left when I was doing my thesis work now have hundreds of thousands of bats restored with protection, and they have become major attractants for tourism. We filmed dozens of kayaks and canoes that people had rented, and were out in front of Nickajack Cave near Chattanooga, having a great time watching hundreds of thousands of bats emerge where there had been none 20 or 30 years ago.
Hi, could you talk a little bit about bat social structures and communication?
I didn't hear that.
Sure. Wanted to know if you could talk a little about bats' social structures and communication.
It's only been in recent years that we've been learning about social structure. Back when I was studying gray bats, I banded 40-some thousand and tracked them for 19 years. And one of the things I noticed right away was that if I caught a group of young bats all together in one place and banded them, I would sometimes catch those same ones together hundreds of miles away over a period of 10 years. And it strongly suggested to me that they must have friendships, know each other, and hang out together. It was not until 20 years later that research using embedded, what do they call the
RFID tags?
Yeah, the
Little pit tags.
pit tags. using pit tags, they were able to find that bats were indeed traveling together, doing things together, knew each other. It's now pretty well documented from many lines of evidence that bats assist each other, share knowledge, adopt orphans, put themselves at risk to help friends. They're pretty incredible. I know of a case in Brisbane, Australia, where a woman named June Took reared an orphan baby gray-headed flying fox and gradually released it to the wild out of her backyard. It would come back to visit with her, but then when the other flying foxes migrated south for the winter, it went with them. And in the spring, she was out in her backyard one day, and here comes this big 4-foot wingspan bat laying on her shoulder and just excited like a puppy dog that's been missing its owner for a couple of weeks. And so she thought that was pretty cool. And the bat kept coming back to visit with her, and then after a while, she noticed that the bat was pregnant. These bats often take their pups and put them in a separate location away from their normal roost while they go to feed, because there are pythons and things that wait to catch them if they're left behind. And then there'll be several mothers that'll stay and babysit the pups that are moved to a new location. This bat every night brought its pup and left it with June Took to babysit until she got done feeding and came back to get it. There's another example where someone reared a flying fox and then moved to Europe and couldn't take the bat with them, left it, and it had rickets because they didn't know in those days how to feed them properly to raise pups. And the woman who kept it while the original benefactor was in Europe for 10 years told me the story about how when the original benefactor returned and that bat didn't even see her, just heard her voice and like went crazy with excitement. And you know, just we have trained bats to come to our hand on call, release them back to the wild, and years later when these marked bats were recaptured, they remembered what we'd taught them and would come on call or go to certain sounds. Bats have mental capacity far beyond what we're accustomed to believing.
Good. Time for maybe one or two more.
Can you say more about bat boxes? Is that something that anyone could put at their home and see bats come to, or is that only on an open space area?
I want to know about
Bat boxes.
Yeah. If you look, I have a relatively recent book publication. You can probably buy it at most bookstores. The Bat House Builder's Guide, and in it we show how to build a variety of bat houses, tell you where to put them, how to place them, and the house that you saw that had 275 bats coming back at dawn, the instructions for building that house are in that guide. I would recommend that if you want to be successful, you'll do the best if you put more than one house up. Bats are used to living in old snags that fall down during storms, and they feel more secure if they know they have an alternative place to live if something goes wrong. I would also say you'll be much more likely to succeed if you put your house within 50 feet but not too terribly close to trees, and the closer you are to a riparian habitat, a river or a lake, the more likely you are to succeed. But you can find out anything you really need to know that we know yet from the Bat House Builders Handbook.
One more?
Thank you very much for that lecture. Have you had much success here in California in terms of the agricultural industry employing or deploying bats for insect control?
Have we had much success?
We had much success in California with the agricultural industry in terms of getting more bats around to help with pest control.
Years ago, a young lady who is an ag consultant at the University of California in Davis came to one of my workshops and got excited about bat houses. And up in the Sacramento area, she has a fair number of, I think most of them are walnut growers, but who have put up bat houses, and many of them have been successful, and it has become fairly popular. I have one funny story to tell. One guy was very zealous about putting up bat houses, but he called me and said, you know, I've got all these bat houses, I put them up just the way you said, but there are no bats in any of them. So I actually came out and looked to see what was going on, and he was mounting his bat houses on the opposite side of the same pole that was used for an owl nest. And I said, I don't think those bats are going to like living next door to their worst enemy. And he later was very successful when he got away from the idea of protecting both owls and bats on the same pole.
Oh, very good. Well, Dr. Tuttle, thank you again very much.
Thank you, Brett.
I have one more announcement I need to make, but Dr. Tuttle will be one more announcement, but Dr. Tuttle will be available afterwards for additional questions. Our next First Wednesday will take place on November 6th on the topic of recycled water in Southern California. You will hear from local water experts how our water is being reclaimed and reused, and the future plans for recycled water in our state and why that matters. We hope that you can join us for the talk, and the information will be posted on our website when you can sign up. Please feel free to exit the theater down here at the bottom and join us for cocktails, conversation, music, and bat crafts. Thanks again for attending this evening.